Today I will discuss my experience in the fossil fuel resistance movement. I live in central New York. We have run up against neoliberalism in the attempt to achieve a just transition to a renewable economy. I'm involved with a group called Coalition for Sustainable Economic Development, which for the first time in my town is a group of trade unions, environmental activists, and racial justice activists. The historic victory of getting a statewide ban on fracking in New York brought thousands of people into the struggle. Many activists brought together. Many are calling for the abolition of fossil fuels altogether. We are fighting to shut down coal-driven power plants and to stop their repowering with fracked gas, to democratize energy distribution, and to prevent the dangerous natural gas storage of gas. The dumping of fracking waste in landfills and on our roads, and the build-out of gas and oil pipelines. This summer, we joined over 900 other activists at an event organized by the New Economy Coalition, a social movement network of more than 150 US-based organizations. Here is their call, and I quote, "This conference is about transforming the system. It's about radical solutions that are rooted in love, solidarity, and liberation. It's also about dismantling the systems of oppression, like white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy, that stand in the way of pushing back against the worst parts of a broken system and building up powerful, inspiring alternatives to replace it. Naming the system of oppression, white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy is indeed revolutionary. And the rhetoric of love, solidarity, and liberation is powerful. Similar rhetoric can be heard in movements that support the Native American struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline, going down right in the middle of the United States. From Canada, it would go from northern United States all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. 350.org is an organization perhaps you've heard of. Their headline said, "Love, solidarity, and resistance." And they said, quote, "We know that we are all connected, that our fights are connected, and that to win, we need to join together, reject the Dakota Access Pipeline, and stop all fossil fuels leasing in the Gulf of Mexico." In section 2, I will query the appeal to love as an organizing tactics. I will support Ann Ferguson and Rosemary Hennessy, who, in the book Love, A Question for Feminism in the 21st Century, suggest that the practice of, quote, solidarity love in an affective economy is a useful oppositional force. In section 3, I will argue that calls for love, solidarity, and resistance can be especially powerful when they're linked with abolitionism and the sort of love that fuels outrage. Section 1. Progressive activists, in solidarity with the labor movement, have been calling for a just transition to a new economy. You can check out Nora's book called Trade Unions in the Green Economy for more information on this important concept of just transition. Quote, "If the production method has to be changed, trade unions demand participation in decision-making, justice in the decisions made, protection from the changes made, and adaptation to local needs." A good example of a left-center alliance working for a just transition to a green economy is the Coalition for Sustainable Economic Development. We call it CSED. This is the organization I referred to at the beginning, where I live. Our principles of unity assert, quote, "We believe we can no longer pursue business as usual when it comes to economic development. The problems we face as a community and society are significant. The planet's future health is endangered. Economic inequality is worsening. Racial and ethnic divisions are still being exploited, and the shared visions that bind us together as humans are threatened." CSED is a positive force for change, especially if we take seriously the important role that emotions and affective relationships play in progressive organizing. We have been forming friendships through our meetings, the gatherings we organize, and even our emails. We have fun, we picnic together, we laugh together, we argue. We congratulate each other on the victories we have won. We exchange deep smiles around the room in recognition of each other. We break down suspicions and stereotypes. Environmentalists in CSED have demonstrated that they could be relied on in the struggle for workers' rights because we were in the same local protests against tax abatements. Environmentalists also learned to understand empathically workers' need for jobs with dignity. Such a cognitive shift combines emotions and empirical knowledge growing out of the personal relationships we have been developing and the stories we are learning about what specific families are facing. The affective element moves knowledge from remotely abstract, something we may have read about or understood in theory, to concrete. The business as usual policy we are fighting derives from the neoliberal economic development model. All local spaces are held hostage to industry, which is enticed with significant tax breaks and public-private infrastructure benefits. This model is piece by piece, where individual businesses compete for tax abatements and lax and rarely enforced government standards are part of a permitting process tilted towards industry. Instead of a rational, aggressive model of addressing climate change, local activists are forced to deal with one development project at a time. It feels as though we have to fight carbon molecule by carbon molecule, investigating every detail of project specifications and bringing pressure to bear on decision makers to limit greenhouse gas emissions. A neoliberal austerity budget fails to provide legal assistance for service recipients, local sustainability officers, professional educators, or local or urban regional planners. Grassroots activists spend their own time studying the intricacies of environmental impact statements and comparing them to state regulations and initiatives, while pressuring local developers and planners on a case-by-case basis. Given the fossil fuel-driven division of labor that is stratified by race, gender, and class, and the fact that the environmental movement is often overwhelmingly white and professional, our relationships can be tenuous and sometimes conflictual. The previous years had seen many of us divided over the closing of a local coal-fired power plant. New owners proposed repowering the plant with natural gas, in other words, fracked gas, which would increase carbon emissions. Workers who are represented by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, were afraid they would lose their jobs, and community members felt threatened with the loss of tax revenue from the plant. At a public forum, the IBEW workers and allies showed up in force in identical orange T-shirts that were paid for by the company. They were outnumbered, however, by those of us in the Abolitionist fossil-free Tompkins group, who came with hundreds of cards signed by people who were against fracking and thus the repowering plan. In late August 2015, however, when CSED received the Tompkins County Workers Center, quote, Friend of Labor Award for being a member of the community who had action in support of working people, the head of the Building Trades Council and a leader of fossil-free Tompkins hugged each other in glee. Perhaps this hug can symbolically represent the type of emotional connection that is found among activists that Ann Ferguson and Rosemary Hennessy address. Section 2. People have daily material needs based in the body, material needs for sustenance and shelter, as well as emotive needs rooted in connections involving the exchange of material human energy. In, quote, Feminist Love Politics, Romance, Care, and Solidarity, Ann Ferguson argues that satisfying these emotional needs forms a caring economy that is constituted by social relations of power, either those expressing power over, which are dominative, or power with, which are solidarity relationships. Under certain conditions, quote, global capitalism and its intertwined domination systems of patriarchy, racism, and imperialism can be undermined by the transformative anti-capitalist revolutionary love generated by global resistance movements. Effective or emotional energy is produced not only in activities such as feeding someone or otherwise directly caring for them, but it is also released through the emotional bonding that takes place when friendships are formed or people work together on social causes, as we saw in C said. Moreover, caring for the natural environment also releases energy that can be profoundly satisfying for people as well as protective or healing of ecological systems. We can have solidarity orientations towards non-human animals and plants and even land. This is a sort of emotional connection spoken of by Aldo Leopold when he encourages us to think like a mountain or presents his land ethic. He says an action is right when it preserves the beauty, integrity, and stability of the land. We ought to recognize that we are simply elements of the land community. Therefore, appeals to love, solidarity, and resistance are not simply rhetorical. They call into play the emotional energies that can prefigure the sort of human relationships needed to shift to a renewable energy economy or relations that enhance our potential and solidarity. Progressive social change movements are now forming new kinds of solidarity relationships that can refocus the surplus energy lost in apolitical or oppressive relations in one's family, or the surplus energy limited by couple love friendships. Thus, they satisfy feminist needs for political identification and affiliation that would correspond to the dream of a more equitable and sustainable world, as Ferguson points to. A Marxist theory of human nature corresponds to Ferguson's approach. Humans have an array of powers corresponding to needs that are satisfied through material activity. Our practical actions form an internal relation with the objects that satisfy these needs. Like Hegel, Marx argues that our passions or desires motivate our activity and provide the material force that constructs history. Human beings have the power to love, to empathize, and the aspiration to form what Ferguson calls solidarity love relationships that are transformative. We have a desire to exercise the skills we have gained through our experience and to expand our knowledge base. Now, however, ossified, hierarchical, patriarchal divisions of labor in the fossil fuel economy hamper the development of the types of energies needed for a renewable energy economy. Pipe fitters, electricians, carpenters, and plumbers, for example, have labor power and surplus material energy thrown off by neoliberal macroeconomic policies and alienating capitalist relations of production. People in frontline communities abandoned by the coal, oil, or gas industry form a reserve army of labor that could be drawn into a new green economy. activists fighting for a just transitions form an important historical material force pushing for these new relations of production. Section 3. The passion incorporated in nonviolent direct action includes a sense of moral outrage that intensifies the love power that Ferguson and Hennessy address. The Zapatistas refer to this energy as dignified rage. The fossil fuel resistance movement seeks to abolish altogether the use of carbon-based sources as our main energy supply. For example, in New York, over 400 of us have been arrested at the gates of Crestwood Corporation, a storage and infrastructure provider for natural gas products, as part of the We Are Seneca Lake direct action campaign. Our abolitionist spirit incorporates the passions of both love and outrage. A loving abolitionist outrage can also be seen in the occupation of land in a northern state of the United States called North Dakota to stop an oil pipeline threatening the water supply of the Standing Rock Sioux Nation and 17 million people who live along the Missouri River. This nonviolent direct action has so far prevented the completion of a pipeline designed to carry inflammable and toxic oil from fracking fields, ultimately going all the way to Texas for profitable export. Theirs is a struggle to protect the commons, the land, the water supply, and sacred ancestral burying grounds. Natives and allies have formed an intentional community where the caring labor, usually done in families, like eating, is being organized communally. In other words, activists are creating collective, affective economies that appropriate surplus love energy in progressive, prefigurative ways that Ferguson sees as necessary in moving beyond white supremacist patriarchal capitalism. Interestingly, the women of the Brave Heart Society, White Buffalo Calf Woman Society, and Stone Boy Society issued an open letter to Obama calling on him to stop the pipeline and its related violence, as well as the threats to women that usually develop with fracking and pipeline construction. For example, they're called man camps, where the miners and the frackers live. They house workers, and it provokes increased alcohol and drug consumption, as well as sex trafficking. The Native women say that 40% of those being trafficked are Native women. Also, they condemn the violence occurring in strong terms. Quote, "A war of biopolitics is being waged on indigenous homelands all across the Americas. Our indigenous bodies, which are essentially a direct reflection of Mother Earth, have been and continue to be controlled by corporations and governments that operate for profit without regard for human life. Therefore, not only is the Dakota pipeline struggle forming prefigurative, affective communities defending the commons, but it is also protecting Native women's reproductive rights, caring rights, which are, quote, intimately connected to the struggle for cultural survival and control over their land base. An abolitionist ethic of solidarity love also takes place in Black people's struggle against police violence, as well as in the White Allies group Showing Up for Racial Justice, or SURGE. Both African American and Indian communities have struggled for self-determination against profound repression and state-sanctioned forms of masculine hegemonic violence. The creation of the U.S. settler state and American empire required the dehumanization of both peoples through commodification, forced displacement, and genocide. In closing, I want to suggest an ecological epistemology which would intensify the moral outrage accompanying abolitionist forces of solidarity love. Sandra Steingraber, an ecologist and winner of the Goldman Award who has served jail time for her arrest with We Are Seneca Lake, is a powerful leader whose words unite many. And she says, "We are all musicians in a great human orchestra, and it is now time to play the Save the World Symphony. You are not required to play a solo, but you are required to know what instrument you hold and play it well as you can. You are required to find your place in the score. What we love, we must protect. That's what love means. From the right to know and the duty to inquire flows the obligation to act." This standpoint provides a critical corrective force that makes love a criterion of truth. We need to ask ourselves the following sort of question: what kind of human practice and ecological awareness can enable us to participate in the ecosystem rather than dominate it? To recognize that we are not alone, that the climate system is speaking and acting in ways we must attend to. In Bread and Roses in the Commons, Rosemary Hennessy theorizes that the transformative force of solidarity love forms a surplus energy that can be theorized in materialist terms as the passionate reason that accompanies the conversion of unmet need and living labor into organized resistance for a common cause. We use both passion and reason in ways that enable us to move away from the brink of climate disruption and that intensify our movements against white supremacy and patriarchal capitalism. Our epistemology ought to be a moral epistemology of critical solidarity with other humans and the whole ecosystem. Truth entails resistance. Thank you.